As the novel coronavirus continues its spread throughout the world, many nations have taken to instituting a variety of measures intending to combat its spread. These policies include establishing curfews, shuttering non-essential businesses, and requiring residents to practice social distancing. These measures are made in the name of public safety and are widely perceived as necessary to flatten the curve, reducing the undue burden the disease places on healthcare infrastructure and, subsequently, lowering the total number of deaths it causes either directly or indirectly. Many of these measures are seen as generally necessary and helpful and only are really opposed by a vocal, non-representative minority. But while these measures are to promote public health, some government actions actually pose a pretty serious threat to democratic health. There are many places around the world where COVID-19 poses a danger to democracy itself. In order to understand how, we'll have to clarify a couple prominent misconceptions about democracy, at least how it works in practice. A lot of people think that there are really only two kinds of countries. Democracies, where citizens have a cornucopia of rights and liberties and politicians compete for their mandate, and autocracies, where citizens have none and there's very little uncertainty about who gets to be in charge. But that dichotomy is too simple. Many countries are actually mixed, where the pretenses of democratic rule, such as voting, economic freedoms, and representative legislatures, are present, but don't actually have much leverage over the individuals really in charge. Kind of like how the closed door button on most US elevators don't actually do anything, but gives the appearance of control. In fact, mixed systems make up the largest plurality of countries around the world and house roughly a third of its population. Another prominent misconception is that the transition from democracy to autocracy is sudden, clear, and obvious to all observers, such as the coup that put Pinochet in power in Chile or the invasion of France by Nazi Germany. Although this is actually less of a misconception and more of an outdated truth. Research by Anna Luhrmann and Stefan Lindberg show that pre-1993, all of the cases of democratic decay into autocracy can be chalked up to invasion, military coups, or autogolpes, where leaders acquire power through legitimate means and then quickly dissolve democratic institutions. Post-1993, though, things become less obvious. Most instances of what Luhrmann and Lindberg call autocratizing events occur gradually, often by using perfectly legal maneuvers as a pretense to slowly consolidate power. This is the case in places like Turkey and Hungary that used to be considered full-fledged democracies, but have since eroded into electoral authoritarian systems. Luhrmann and Stefan were not the first to observe the slippery slope and subtle nature of democratic backsliding since the 1990s. In fact, that's basically the consensus view arrived at by dozens of independent researchers working on the topic. But their work managed to hone in on an operational enough definition that they could track the prognosis of democracies that underwent these autocratizing events. And they found that 80% of democracies that started going down the path don't stop until they become autocracies. So what does this have to do with COVID-19? Well, when it comes to slowly accumulating power and dismantling democracy, not all legal settings are the same. In normal times, an executive's ability to deploy troops, divert funds, or alter election rules are severely curtailed by other political institutions, such as legislatures or the courts. This gums up the works, making action on some national priorities slower and more efficient, but it prevents the executive from becoming too powerful. But in abnormal times, it's generally acknowledged that inefficiencies can be more than just inconveniences. Not being able to quickly mobilize the military when an enemy is knocking on the door to invade poses an existential threat. It's seen as easier in extreme cases like these to just have one person in charge. So when there's a state of emergency in democracies, there's a long-standing tradition for these actors to accede to a temporary transferal of their power so that the executive can tackle whatever's going wrong. In theory, the emphasis is on the temporary bit. But in practice, it's not uncommon for many, if not most, of the rights to be given back, but also for the executive to have picked up a few more permanent powers. It turns out that eliminating a lot of the legal and political limitations on executives has the side effect of making it easier for executives to engage in autocratizing events without technically breaking any laws. That is, in some cases, trying to save democracy from outside threats can imperil it from within. It's like those commercials for antidepressants that list suicide as a possible side effect. Later research by Luhrmann, this time with Brian Rooney, looks at democracies from the 1970s through 2016 and shows that states of emergencies make democracies significantly more vulnerable to autocratizing events. In fact, they estimate that declaring a national emergency makes nations about 60% more likely to have an autocratizing event. And they found that 86% of democracies that engaged in autocratizing events during the state of emergency ultimately wound up as autocracies. If you're thinking, wait a minute, wasn't this basically just the entire political subplot of the Star Wars prequels? The answer is yes, but the problem with the prequels wasn't a lack of accuracy in its political commentary. It's that for a series that's fundamentally a multi-part morality play with space wizards, it's that it injected too much accuracy. Well, that and having Jar Jar Binks. The point is that many executives within democratic systems take advantage of states of emergency to make moves to consolidate their power. Because these moves are gradual and because most autocracies are actually mixed systems, it's easy to keep going along the path until a state just isn't a democracy anymore. And most states that start along this path wind up in some form of autocracy. The threat and challenges of COVID-19 has caused dozens of governments around the world to declare states of emergency. And for good reason, right? If ever there was a need for a state of emergency, global pandemics certainly qualify. But it also has provided coverage for some nations to take advantage of the situation, giving leaders an excuse to consolidate power. Bolivia's president, for example, has suspended the operations of the legislature. The government in Sri Lanka is punishing individuals who publicize remarks critical of the state's response to the coronavirus. And in Uganda, it appears that police forces are using shelter-in-place orders as an excuse to target LGBT youth. A research team led by Amanda Edgell at the Varieties of Democracy, or VDEM project, has taken to measuring and cataloging the hazards that COVID-19 poses to nations' democratic health. While the virus is a global threat, the risk it poses to democracy is not universally felt. So far, researchers have data on 142 countries. Of this, 25 are already autocratic, so it's not like COVID-19 can cause a democratic backslide there. 47 nations have instituted coronavirus response measures that pose a minor threat to democracy, 38 are what they identify as being in medium risk, and 48 are at a high risk of inducing backsliding events. Just like with individual level health risks due to the virus, astute viewers will notice that there are some substantial democratic comorbidities. Many of the places with high levels of COVID-specific risk were already the kinds of places to institute authoritarian policies if they could get away with it. 60% of high-risk countries are already classified as electoral autocracies. The same could be said for 41% of medium-risk countries, but only for 15% of low-risk countries. Corona doesn't have to be the kiss of death for democracy. Edgell and the VDEM research team identify a number of policy recommendations that can make democracies more robust to the virus. These include making standards for the use of executive power in emergency situations more explicit and visibly tying them to democratic practices. It involves keeping the courts and legislatures operating, when viable, with remote procedures, as well as avoiding giving absolute power to the people in executive positions. Yet again, this is also something that we should have admittedly learned from the Star Wars prequels. Yeah, generally something to be avoided there. I'm curious to see what you guys think about this, so drop some comments down and wherever the hell YouTube has put the comment section lately. I'm looking forward to reading all of them and responding to a few at the end of the next video. And if you've enjoyed this video, I hope you consider liking it and sharing it. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more videos on our endlessly fascinating social world. Quick shout out to Dr. Amanda Edgell, who I've mentioned a few times in this video, for her insights and expertise. For those who are interested, links for the sources, as always, are going to be down in the doobly-doo, as well as links to the Twitter and the blog. Look forward to see you guys up there as well. And as always, a huge thank you to the channel supporters on Patreon, including Knowing Better and Joel, who were this video's research assistants. Thanks to being a parent, most of my video making time has shifted to the very early morning, so in addition to helping me afford the sources that make these videos possible, your donations legitimately help me buy the coffee that keeps me up to make them in the first place. And as a thank you, depending on how much you donate, you'll get early content, your name on the end card, or a shout out. So if you're able to help out, you can click the link down at the description or at the end card at the end of the video. I really appreciate it. Normally, I'd roll into some comment responses from the last video, but the last video was me announcing my paternity leave. So I'm just going to roll in some of the awesome and encouraging comments that y'all put so that I can give you from the bottom of my heart a sincere thank you for your understanding and support. I'm excited to be back. And with that, it's actually all I have for you guys today, so I'll see you next time.